Welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Sandhill Consultants and Airwin. I'm Stephen Fegg, Director at Database Trends and Applications and Unisphere Research. I will be your host for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled Demystifying Data Governance. Before we begin, I want to explain how you can be a part of this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been selected during the show, you will receive an email response. Plus, one lucky viewer today will win a $100 American Express gift card. The winner will be announced at the end of the event, so stay tuned to see if it's you. Now, to introduce our speakers for today, Jeffrey Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants, and Hamilton Hayes, Enterprise Modeling Standards Practice Leader at Sandhill Consultants. Now, before we get started, a quick poll question. Please indicate your level of readiness in establishing your data governance program. Just looking, ready to go, or we have a solution but need help in implementing. And while you kindly take a moment to select your answer, just a reminder, if you have a question at any point during the presentations today, just enter it into the text box. We're going to have a live Q&A at the end, and if your question isn't answered, we will get to all questions by email. Okay, so we'll just give you a few more seconds to select your answers. All right, and it looks like the results are coming in. So 77% of you are just looking, and 22% of you have a solution but need help in implementing. So at this point, I'm going to pass the event over to Robert Ludden, Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Sandhill Consultants, for a quick introduction/overview.
Hey, Stephen. Thanks very much indeed. It's a pleasure to be speaking to your community again. Just a quick note on who we are. With me in the call, you'd already introduced the speakers, but just to reiterate, Jeff Giles is our Principal Architect and brings a wealth of knowledge in the enterprise modeling and data governance space. Ham Hayes is also not only our architect, one of our principal architects, but he's also a product manager for one of the products that he's helped us develop in our go-to-market framework that we'll see later on in the presentation. And also, just a note, Sandhill Consultants, we're a great team of people with outstanding technology and industry-acknowledged processes through the CMMI and the DMM frameworks that help our clients build comprehensive data architectures, resulting in persistent data management processes that help found a robust data governance practice that produce trusted, reliable data with the end goal of reducing risk and achieving compliance. We also have with us today, as Stephen had introduced, our technology partner. Our technology partner with us today is Irwin, and Irwin is the most trusted name in data modeling for over 30 years. I'm sure a lot of people now understand that as of March 2016, Irwin became a standalone company and has expanded its focus from data modeling to a holistic data management environment and brings in innovation across the spectrum, including enterprise architecture, business process modeling, and data governance. It's the data governance section that we'll be talking about today with our relationship with Irwin. Irwin has any squared approach to delivering enterprise data management that both enables technical and business stakeholders to access, use, and trust any data from anywhere across the organization. So with that, let me just quickly go through and talk about the agenda. In today's agenda, and it's quite appropriate that 77% are looking for advice and guidance in data governance. We're going to do a quick review of the data governance fundamentals. And from there, we'll be talking about data governance frameworks and how they can jumpstart a data governance program. We'll then review data governance platform and architectures and what options the clients may want to look at. And finally, we'll talk about how Sandhill may be able to help our clients. So with that, let me pass it over to Ham Hayes to introduce part one. Ham.
Well, thank you very much, Robert, and I'd like to welcome everybody that's attending our webinar today. Much appreciate your attendance. We're going to take a look at some fundamentals around data governance. And specifically two perspectives that we want to talk to today. One is the notion of reducing risk associated with data. We're all been in this business. We know that we can deal with certain kinds of problems fairly easily, but there are other kinds of problems that seem to be intractable or very difficult. And these are where we begin to look at how we manage things, manage our data systems, and specifically how we improve control and governance of those systems. The second thing we're going to look at is optimizing their operations. It's one thing to set a goal, but it's another thing to also do it efficiently or get to that goal efficiently. So with that, let's begin to dig into here a little bit. So one of the questions we always ask ourselves, what's the major cause for increased data risk? And there are many identified causes. This is one survey. And you can see that a lot of it seems to be related to technology issues, maybe coding problems, maybe other kind of systems technological issues. But there are other groups here that are important to realize. Management issues seem to be a major factor. It may be everything from motivation in terms of how the organization is really focused on governance as something that they perceive as value. It may also be planning difficulties or capabilities. Accountability seems to be big in many areas in terms of which organization is responsible for doing what within the data management schema. Resource availability, that tends to be a limiting factor in many number of cases, and also the training level. These management issues tend to be fairly influential in terms of effectiveness of governance. But there are also things like structural issues. Where's the metadata specification? Is that in place in terms of really understanding of what we mean by the concept of data? Definitions and meaning are really critical factors in terms of the usefulness and functionality of data in a system. We've all run into, I'm sure, conflicts between the name of a term and what it means, and sometimes, especially in system integrations and mergers and acquisitions and things of that nature, this can cause lots of problems. But thirdly, and not lastly, though, is process information or process control. Processes and procedures. Do we in fact have a specification of what the controls are in a process? Do we have sharing and collaboration problems? Do we have measures in place? Do we really know what we're doing and how well we're doing it and what our trend lines are? So these are some of the major causes that increase data risk, and a data governance program will want to be addressing most, if not all, of these. So why is data governance needed? Well, management of data is really what is really an essential element of success of a business. We're seeing more and more of this being revealed in newsprint, as it were, or on the internet in terms of problems that relate to data. People who, a lot of our functionality can be compromised by errors that people make, and how do we treat that in terms of a governance system to help reduce or ameliorate those problems. Productivity can be quite limited if information isn't found or if it's in error. It certainly can reduce the efficiency and effectiveness of a business operation. Such things as data breaches are becoming more complex. How do those relate to data governance? And so certainly at the end of the day, are we compliant with our business goals as well as regulatory requirements, things like that, which are built into our overall business needs and goals? Let's see if we get our little clicker to work here. Okay. So data governance from the concept of optimizing operations.
Hey, Ham, it seems like we've lost you there. Just double checking if you can hear us, but if not, I will. This is Robert here. So, Ham, what I'm going to do is I'm going to address this slide and try and let you come back online, see if that can happen. And Jeff and Stephen, are you guys still on the call?
Absolutely, Robert. We're still here.
Okay,
yep, we're here.
Check. That's great. Yeah. So Ham, you were talking about data governance, and one of the things we wanted to talk about was the definition of data governance. And of course, in order to look at data governance, we looked up Wikipedia, and Wikipedia came up with the following definition: data governance is a set of processes to ensure that important data assets are formally managed throughout the enterprise, to ensure that data can be trusted and the people can be made accountable for any adverse event that happens because of poor quality of data. We also then took a look at how Sandhills' philosophy on data governance, and so we look at it, much in the same light, but we also look at the data governance is all about ensuring that the overall management of the availability, usability, integrity, and security of the data meets the desired business and regulatory outcomes, and includes a broad participation in the practice and oversight of the effectiveness of the data management. And as we say, and you've heard this term being said before, managing data right can be an asset. However, if incorrect, it becomes a liability, and that's what we want to try and avoid. And I think that, Ham, you're back online, yeah?
Yes, apologies for the dropout there.
There you go. There you go. So I've moved the slide for you. You're on
probably
data governance. Okay.
The data that was probably data related, that dropout. So, okay, let's take a look at guidelines for successful data program. I mean, I think we all recognize that we've got some strong needs here. But what do we actually need in order to get to a point where we feel comfortable with our data governance? So there are a number of critical elements that we've identified and that also show up in industry-based standards. But having an assessment, where am I? How do I get to where I want to go? How do I govern this thing? Organizationally, how do we actually fit something within our organization? And we want to be efficient. We don't want it to cost us a lot of extra overhead or slow down our business processes. Governance roles. What are the specific roles and accountabilities within an organization? What are the policies, okay, especially with regard to accountabilities? But what are that we want to make sure that we are implementing within our governance system? What are our standards? Okay, we cannot have a data governance system without having standards, and especially with regard to the structure, the metadata. What is it supposed to do? What's it supposed to look like? The processes, what are our control processes? How do we conduct audits? How do we make sure that we are performing the governance functions that we want to perform? How do we measure our business? How do we measure our data governance and data management? And most especially, how do we monitor the efficiency in which we are progressing towards our goal? It's one thing to say, hey, I've got standards over here, but the real question is it really improving my business? All right, is it just something that I do locally, or is it something that my overall enterprise is in fact trying to approach in terms of improvement and continuous improvement? And most, and again, I say most especially a lot because each one of these points is actually a critical point. We also have to have systems that are adaptable to changing requirements and changing needs and changing marketplace. So let's look at an assessment. Most of our work is based upon using the CMMI Institute's data management maturity specifications. The DMM breaks down data management into 6 sectors, one of which is data governance. So each one of these sectors covers some aspect of data management. It's a very thorough set of standards. We found it to be very reliable in terms of integrity and completeness. And we've modeled our standards-based product and our data governance product around the DMM. We've also incorporated things like DCAM and ISO, the DAMA's DMBOK. There's various elements there that have also informed our basic data governance offering. The data governance breaks down to specifically in the DMM to governance management, which are a sense of governance processes, artifacts, policies, so forth and so on. The business glossary or business term structure and how to manage that, and also the technical metadata management. Those three areas are core areas in terms of concepts around data governance. And we can see that as a organization, you may set a goal. In this radar chart, it might be represented by this white dashed circle. And your actual progress or state might be the radar actual profile that looks like where you are at this point in time. So there might be your goals, and then of course where you are mapping up to that. All right. So the assessment leads you to how do I now build a roadmap out of that? Knowing where I am, this is what the assessment gives you. And if I'm basing my assessment on a set of industry standards like the DMM, then I can say, hey, I know where I am. I can identify, classify my data, my processes, the structures, and I can classify those with regard to the standard. Then I can say where I want to get to is I fold in my business objectives, I fold in my regulatory requirements, and I identify those critical points. Where are the big deltas or the small deltas? What are the priorities that I assign that says there are a set of waypoints that I need to touch in order to get to my goal? We do two levels of assessment. We do full DMM assessments. We're certified by the CMMI to do that. And we also do a little more limited assessments where we might just be looking at like a data governance system. We might be looking at platform and architecture standards, things of that nature in terms of our assessment methodologies. So anyway, that all leads into a roadmap, and that leads into what do we need to do to set up a structure whereby we can manage or you can manage your data governance system. We look at this from the standpoint of authority. Okay, what is the data governance authority? What do we get from the various levels? In our fairly straightforward view of an organization, we look at executive level. What do the executives provide? C-level provides the resources, provides the motivation, strategic initiatives, top-level business goals. Fundamentally the guidance of where we need to get to and some of the important elements at a top level of how we want to get there. That empowers, the C-level empowers what we call the Data Governance Authority, which is a cross-functional organization of the stakeholders, fundamentally, that are responsible for fleshing out what are the policies, what are the standards we're going to use, what are the key core processes that need to be implemented. What are the organizational relationships? I mean, there is no organization that doesn't have, structure that needs to have interactions between functional groups, between organizational structures and so forth. What are the responsibilities and accountabilities? All of that kind of stuff is defined in what we call this middle layer of data governance authority. That work there informs the people who are doing the work, who are doing the compliance reviews, data stewards. It informs the people that are doing definitions of business data terms, business data owners, subject matter experts, analysts. Informs the data architects in terms of what are the various functions and roles that they play within the overall organization and the overall data governance methodology. If we look at this in detail, we can see governance roles can be specifically mapped to the data governance processes. I mentioned the data governance processes as one of the three areas within the DMM structure. So these are a list of the processes. It's not all of them. It's just a sampling of the processes that are called out in DMM. And we can see the various types of roles. These are all logical roles. They can be mapped to an existing organization. So a structure steward might be mapped into what somebody calls in their organization a data custodian or whatever. But these are functional roles, and we can see that for each process, we use a RACI diagram here that maps out the responsibilities and accountabilities for each one of these processes. So we get a clear-cut map of an organization's allocation of their roles and responsibilities. If we, in fact, in our data governance product, DGCVS, we actually have descriptions of each process, and we can map those particular roles and responsibilities into a specific specification for those. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the other things we do with the RACI and the processes involved here. We can also see that the metadata standards are fundamentally, we look at it from the standpoint of a view, in this case, a information system map. You might call it a conceptual model of the data governance system in terms of what are all of the elements, what are the relationships between all of the elements, so that it's not just a static view, but it's really getting to the dynamic view of what has to be exchanged in the way of information between the various elements of data governance and also with the other parts of the data management system. These also decompose into the specific metadata standards. Here's one for a business term that basically identifies all of the metadata for the business terms. These, of course, can be expressed in terms of also those elements that are critical to the enterprise and critical to that particular data element. Let's see, so we've got a linkage between these within our model of the enterprise. The other element is looking at the processes, and we say, okay, we've got in here an example of a compliance review process, which is a core process of data stewardship. The ability to actually look at a data object or a set of data objects and compare those data objects to a set of the standards which we've defined by the Data Governance Authority, and by policy say that we have certain rules about the degree of compliance that we need to meet in order for an object to be acceptable for use within the system. Very straightforward, actually, data management activity. Is this object suitable for our use? That is the whole core of it. So we use cross-functional workflows that, in fact, define all of the elements. This is a traditional swim lane diagram. Shows all of the logic and operations within a review process. Shows artifacts within the process. And it also can be converted in our implementation of our data governance system in SharePoint. It can be converted into an actual workflow so that a data steward or a business data owner or whatever can actually participate on a daily basis in a workflow that automates this process and also gives you the basis for doing metrics and measures for how well your products are doing and how well your process is performing. Measures and evaluations are critical to knowing where you are, how well you're doing. This is an example of a reuse metric. It's just one of the parameters in terms of the capability of using an object throughout an enterprise. Let's say it's the business term of customer. Can I use it across all of my business operations and business units within my enterprise? If I can reuse it, then I'm going to save a lot of cost and time in terms of developing. I don't have to develop the concept of customer multiple times. I can make sure that it is reusable. I can certify it for reuse and so forth and so on. And this is a set of metrics that just says how well am I doing on this particular parameter. So compliance metrics, process metrics, reuse metrics, these are core things that we want to know about in terms of the progress of our product. The last thing we want to do in terms of these 8 items that we talked about at the very beginning is how efficient is our system. And in this particular case, we're looking at a dashboard view of a compliance process. And we're saying, hey, we're getting this kind of performance level for this particular step in the process. Is it in fact an acceptable level? Can we trend line it? Can we in fact see where we maybe need to make some improvements, and so forth and so on? Again, this is really core to the effectiveness of our data governance system. Now, I've kind of skimmed over the whole concept of the data governance system and our approach to it. What I'd like to do now is turn it over to Jeff Giles to drill in on some more detail with regard to our products and also our partner. And Jeff, go ahead and take it away.
Thank you, Ham. Okay, so you heard Ham talk a lot about governance. So he mentioned that there are people that actually do the work. There are processes that describe how the work is done. There are policies that guide how that work conforms to rules and regulations, and a whole bunch of other moving parts. Now, it's rather difficult to manage this using, let's say, Visio and standard Office tools, although people do it. Irwin has built a platform for this kind of implementation. So let me take you through the different layers in the stack here. The top layer here, which is indicated by the orange rectangle, is the actual Irwin module. Now, Irwin has a couple of different modules. They have the Irwin Data Modeler, which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with, but there's also an enterprise architecture module, and they have this new data governance module. So within the data governance module, it has artifacts that you can manage in a governance program. So some of those artifacts might be a business term and some of these other things. Below that, there is a blue rectangle. Now, these are the capabilities, or what I would call the plumbing, of the system that allows you to do things like collaborate with other people, have Kanban boards, send out notifications, have people comment on the artifacts, things like definitions, etc. So that's kind of like the plumbing underneath that module. And then that gray area at the bottom is the actual structural implementation. Now, Irwin's approach is a service approach, so it's a cloud approach. So the unique advantage that this has is that you don't have to install anything locally. That is, you don't have to have a Windows client and a middle-tier application server and a back-end database. All you really need is a web browser capable of displaying JavaScript, which most of those do. So those are the three components, the different pieces that fit those things together. Now, with that, we can take a look at answering some of the basic questions around data, like who's responsible for it, what's the definition of it. You know, the infrastructure allows us to ask these questions and get answers to these critical questions. Now, looking at the next slide here, we have a look at some of the different components of the governance module. So looking on the right-hand side, there's some graphical representations of a business perspective, a technical perspective, and a dashboard like Ham showed a little bit earlier. So what I'm going to do is drive into these different perspectives and tell you essentially what you're able to work with. So the business glossary obviously has a business perspective. That is, the people that are using this are generally business people. So the nomenclature is in business speak. It has to do with business terms. It talks about who's responsible for something like a business term. So there's the governance. There's that RACI concept that Ham talked about a little bit earlier. So this perspective here is built for business people, because some governance tools will take a technical user interface, give it to a business analyst or a business person, and expect them to navigate through that to get to what they need. This basically says that you need the right interface for the right group of people you're trying to reach. So this is a business perspective. Now, the next perspective here is a data dictionary. So for all of you data architects and enterprise architects out there, you know that you deal with things like domains, and domains have allowable values, and those values might have different data types that have different lengths. This is something that I would be looking at if I were a more technically inclined individual. So the idea here is that you can customize this user interface specifically for the people that you want to reach. As a matter of fact, you can customize the meta model underneath this. So if there's a property or characteristic that you know that you want to capture about your organization, but it doesn't show up here out of the box, you can extend this meta model to capture that information. So this is the governance part. So the previous two slides, the one that showed the business term, which was business people interacting with a business artifact, like a business term. The other one was the data dictionary. So that's technical people interacting with technical definition of data. This is the governance process. Now, as Ham mentioned, you've got people that are going to be stewards, and those stewards will be assigned to either a domain or some particular area of the business that they collect and manage the information for. And that's what this slide is basically talking about, is that governance infrastructure about the policies, the processes, who does that kind of stuff is here. So this is really kind of an overlay on top of those other two perspectives. So you can use that infrastructure, that plumbing plus that module, to conduct your governance program, because we all know it is a program, it's not a project. There is really no end to data governance. Data governance is an ongoing thing. So having the infrastructure available to manage and monitor it is always helpful, rather than cobbling together some Excel spreadsheets, some Word documents, maybe a couple Visios. It might work if you start small, but at some point in time, you'll need a more robust infrastructure. So let's move on and start talking about Sandhills' approach to governance. So Robert mentioned earlier that we had a Wikipedia definition that was straight out of the box. It's a series of processes that are all integrated together to make sure that you have good quality data, right? But it doesn't go down into the details of how you actually get to quality data. That's the part that's missing. So Sandhills' approach is really about the details about how you get to a good quality definition for a term. A good quality, let's say, standard for naming your data elements and data objects, right? So that you don't have a data model that has CUST, C-U-S-T, C-U-S, customer, CSTMR, 5 or 6 different abbreviations for the same metadata term. So Sandhills' approach to this is to get down into the details where other people don't go, that talk about how you're going to accomplish this. Now, it does stand on its own. That is, as Ham mentioned, we have something called DGCVS. Now, DGCVS is a standalone product. That is, it has all of the processes and procedures and racy things to allow you to get a start on your governance program. But you can also work on top of the Sandhill infrastructure here. So I mentioned the orange, the blue, and the gray areas. Now, where this comes in is that we actually show the policies, procedures, measures, all those things that Ham was talking about before. They actually can sit on top of this, because you've got the module, but the module doesn't come pre-populated with all the procedures you need. You still have to do that. So we've got those procedures, as Ham mentioned. How is change management handled? What kind of roles are in there? Do you have data analysts, data architects, enterprise architects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the content of that information rests on top of the infrastructure of the governance module, which basically allows you to do the governing, and the shared capabilities that will allow you to collaborate and share information and do various governance projects that you need to do. And of course, it all sits out there in the cloud, so you don't have to install anything locally. You just spin up a cloud instance, you log in, and you start to build it out. So that's how Irwin's approach and Sandhills' approach actually integrate. So when we look at this, when we built our DGCVS, we consulted the best practices of industry professionals, right? So that would include the folks that do the DMM, DCAM, DMBOK, obviously, and some ISO standards, because when you write this stuff, you need to put it into a standard format that other people can use who aren't necessarily, let's say, governance professionals. Regular business people, regular technology people. So we didn't invent this, off the top of our heads. We did actually consult some standards. Now, obviously, you can implement your own standard if you want, but you have to get in a room, get people together, come up with a standard, come up with a framework, and then your own implementation. Using Sandhills Framework, it's already pre-built, and you can begin to apply it either on top of something like Irwin or as its own standalone initiative. So, delivering the data governance capability. This is the Sandhills Framework, the DGCVS, based on best practices from industry professionals. This allows you to develop your governance program, build out a roadmap so you have an idea where you're at and where you want to be, let's say, 5 years down the road or next year. So you can lay that all out. And if you have a framework, obviously it's easier to communicate that to other people so that they can understand what you're trying to achieve. So when we look at this, the pre-built framework, as a slide previous to this mentioned, there are various artifacts. So artifacts might include a policy. It might include a procedure. It might include a racing matrix. But all of these artifacts are integrated with those pentagrams there. So you've got your governance management, your business glossary, and your metadata management. So metadata management being fairly technical, that is, we're talking about things like data types, etc. Business glossary, really a pure business play here. We're talking about what is the definition of that thing so that when we produce a report, we all agree that the report is giving us the right information. And of course, the governance management is all about what are the rules around what's allowable. How do we measure from where we're at to where we're going? Are we getting any closer to the goal? How fast are we getting there? So these things are all part of that framework, as Ham mentioned earlier. And over here, it's all broken down into the policies, the standards, the processes, the best practices / guidelines for different things. And again, you've got your monitoring, your evaluating, reporting, gap analysis, all that stuff is part of the pre-built framework and assessment. So here we're talking about the user interface to the DGCVS. DGCVS is, of course, built on the DMM. And as the DMM is laid out, it has the different pentagrams that indicate the different quality areas that it concentrates on. So this idea here says that if I click on one of these pentagrams, I can drill down into more details about that thing being governed or managed. Here you can see that we implement DGCVS on SharePoint. So in lieu of working with, let's say, the Irwin infrastructure that I mentioned earlier, this one here is a SharePoint implementation where all of the artifacts are actually hosted in a centralized area that people can drill through. So we've built a user interface on SharePoint that will allow you to navigate through all the different areas and structures to find the information that is important to you. And Ham mentioned this process control workflow. How that relates to the DGCVS is that within the SharePoint system, there is functionality to set up and manage a workflow. So we've gone ahead and set up a workflow that you can manage, which will take you through various stages within your governance process so that you can understand how is that artifact progressing through the system. That is this business term let's say, an approved term? Is it simply a candidate to be approved? how far along in the process is that? So that's your control process workflow that will allow you to visualize that as it moves through the system. And again, here's the RACI matrix that Ham was talking about here. We actually take the RACI concept, put it into a diagram, and it becomes part of the page for that particular process. So all the processes do have the assigned responsibilities and accountabilities there. And then you can always modify these things here as well, because it is a sort of a framework with a platform that does allow you to customize it. So you can go in and modify something, and you say, well, we don't call them data architects, we call them data constructors or data engineers or something like that. So you can always modify these things to suit your particular implementation. So at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Robert Letton to talk about the benefits of the DGCVS system. So take it away, Robert.
Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Sam. A nice introduction to demystifying data governance. I know that we talked at the beginning about the need for data governance, and so we felt it was important to talk about the benefits that a framework like Sandhills Data Governance Capability Delivery System may offer to our clients. It's clear that by adopting and implementing a framework such as DGCVS and its components, because Jeff, you talked about standards and best practices as well, which is one of our other subcomponents, the DACGS for the Metadata Standards and best practices. All these lead to the increase of availability of trusted data. In addition, by leveraging a pre-built framework, an organization can achieve a faster time to value. In fact, by leveraging Sandhills DGCVS, clients have the majority or lion's share data governance solutions pre-built and ready for them to adopt and implement. Also, our DGCVS allows an organization to centralize and manage all their key policies and procedures and standards, all accessible in one place. And that then provides an overall improvement to the satisfaction. So I wanted to also then just kind of highlight, well, why choose Sandhill Consultants for your data governance projects? Several reasons. There are many, but key amongst them would be that our Sandhill resources are CMMI DMM experts. We know this space, and we bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and perspective to this area. We also recognize that there are great tools in the marketplace. However, we believe that Sandhill is the only systemic integrated data governance framework for assessing, implementing, and managing data governance. Our solution does not replace the need for data governance tools like Irwin's framework or IBM's product or other products out there. But as Jeff had shown in the previous slides, it actually sits on top. It actually tells you these are the policies that you want to be able to define for your data governance. So for the 77% of the people that said that they were looking for some kind of solution or they were just starting out, our philosophy is to use a framework to jumpstart your data governance program. We also have a broad knowledge and expertise in the area of data management, enterprise and data architecture, and data governance, metadata management and design, and data risk intelligence. All of this is key when you look at data governance and data management. And we're also certified on all the Irwin products, which may be helpful to an organization that may be looking at the Irwin Data Governance Edge solution. So as we begin to wrap up this presentation, we hope that we've been able to provide some insights into demystifying data governance, leveraging Sandhills and Irwin's unique and powerful approach. Our job is to leverage our knowledge, processes, and technology to deliver an integrated framework that pulls all your data governance needs and best practices together in one central place, allowing our clients to deliver qualifiable, verifiable data fit for consumption. So for clients that are interested in a more in-depth discussion, demonstration, or activities around the CMMI DMM assessment, or would like to explore our Sandhill Framework DGCVS or our data architecture capability delivery system for standards and best practices in and around data governance, or clients are interested in exploring the Irwin Data Governance Edge, you can obviously visit our Sandhill Consultants website, or you can email me at the address on the screen. So with that, I'd like to pass it back to Stephen to go ahead and go into wrap-up.
Absolutely, Robert. At this point in time, we're going to dive into questions from our viewers today. First question, looks like an interesting offering. How fast can it be implemented?
Stephen, thanks for that. Ham, do you want to take that question?
No, sure. Let me get off mute. You know, the speed of implementation, our concept is we deliver a package with a substantive amount of content so that there's the ability to get your organization kind of tuned in fairly quickly to what data governance is all about. We find that there's a learning curve that it can be very long with an organization that doesn't have a systematic approach. So our first goal is to shorten that learning curve and the ramp up, provide you the tools and the knowledge to get going. What we also find is that organizations do want to tune some of the elements into their own language and own perspective. So we'll work with you in terms of the first period, getting that knowledge in place and getting your system set up. I guess the best answer is that we find some people have taken years and maybe never actually achieved it. Is we really shorten that timeline into I'll be so bold as to say months rather than years is the kind of concept to get you actually operating, to get you to the point where you're on a path of maturing your data management, your data governance processes. It's a fairly rapid front-end process. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks, Ham. Stephen, any other questions out there?
Sure. We have one other question. What is your recommendation of the best approach for implementing a data governance program?
Thanks, Stephen. Jeff, I know that we had talked about that in the beginning in one of our slides. Do you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. There isn't really a one-size-fits-all for a data governance program. A lot of it depends on what your maturity level is. That is, how much stuff do you have to govern? There's people that might start out in the early stages where, everything's done by, one or two people who happen to be, heroes of the organization, and all of that stuff needs to be brought into some kind of a repeatable process. You might also have, folks who have a little bit of data governance, but could use a little bit more consistency around how they're going to do certain procedures. So the answer to how long is an interesting one. But what I can say is if you have a framework, if you've got some basic templates around some general policies you want to implement, general standards that need to be implemented, it can certainly accelerate the process of going from, let's say, total chaos to something more manageable.
Excellent. Thanks, Jeff. Sorry, Stephen, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, understood. Robert Hamilton, would you like to weigh in any further on that, or?
Well, I think that Ham had done a very good point right at the beginning that went through the kind of 6 or 7 steps that he noted there, right? So the assessment is going to be critical. Setting up that data governance authority is key. Defining the roles the data owners and the custodians, defining the policies and the accountabilities, developing the metadata standards, controlling the audit processes, developing the measures and evaluations and monitoring the efficiencies of the controls over the time. All of those are critical. And as such, what we have done, I think that Ham and Jeff had done a good point of looking at the framework of business glossary, governance management, and metadata management, which are all key components of data governance. And what we've done is we've taken those key guidelines and built them out into reusable artifacts that customers can adopt and implement in their own organization. So I think that's a nice little question there. That's how we would actually achieve it. Hopefully that answers that question.
Thank you very much, Robert. I'd like to once again thank our speakers today, Jeffrey Giles, Principal Architect at Sandhill Consultants, Hamilton Hayes, Enterprise Modeling Standards Practice Leader at Sandhill Consultants, as well as Robert Ludden, Vice President and Chief Marketing Officer at Sandhill Consultants. If you would like to review this presentation or send it to a colleague, please use the same URL that you used for today's live event. It will be archived, and you'll receive an email tomorrow once the archive is posted. Now, as we stated earlier, just for participating in today's event, someone would win a $100 American Express gift card, and the winner today is Steve Jorgensen. Steve, we will be in touch via email so you can claim your prize. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today, and we hope to see you again soon.